Hello and welcome to Cylinder Radio. This is the second episode that we're doing on transgenderism in America. I'd like to welcome my guest, Corinna Cohn. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
So just to get started, this is going to be the second episode that we have on this issue because I think that to understand the cylinder, we have to get all these different perspectives, all these different flashlights, and this could be like the second flashlight. And I know that you have some different thoughts and a different take on some issues when it comes to transgenderism. So maybe could you just introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. I am an adult who transitioned as a teenager back in the early 90s. So I have been in the trans community for many years, and because of that length of association, I've seen aspects of the trans community, and I've also had an opportunity to consider some of my views over the long term. So I have some points of view now that are no longer or would not be considered mainstream in the trans community. And it really has a lot to do with the underlying principles of our identity.
Interesting. Could you go into some details, some specifics about like what maybe something that you thought that now you don't think is mainstream or okay that you've changed your mind on, like something for our audience who isn't familiar?
I think the most important example is that when I was a teenager and I was questioning gender identity, I was given some assurances or some belief that by taking estrogen or hormone therapy and by having surgery, that would literally make me a member of the opposite sex for all intents and purposes. Mm-hmm. Not literally, but for all practical senses. And that transition would be an event in my life and not some sort of continuing condition. What I've learned is that when you do transition, you are permanently placing yourself in a small class in society. And there's no way to escape that again unless maybe you detransition. So it's becoming trans, that becomes a permanent aspect of who you are.
Right.
But,
so I'm sorry, where did you get that idea from? That like, this is just the thing you go through, this is the transition, and then you're going to be something, completely different on the other side. That's kind of like, where did you get that from? Was that just from people that you've talked to who were trans? Was that from media? Like, where did you have that idea?
It was mostly from other trans people. And so back in the early 90s, back before the World Wide Web became prominent, there were other forums where people could meet, and one of them was something called IRC.
Okay.
And there was a community of trans people on IRC, mostly adults, and they were delighted to have, young people come in and try to give them some mentorship and guidance. In retrospect, I wonder how much of that is guidance and how much is grooming. But these adults did give me a lot of validation. And that was something that I was missing in my life at that point. Yeah.
So, and then you see something different now. What would be were there just little moments where you started to say like, maybe this isn't what I was kind of told or sold or groomed to be? Like, or was it all of a sudden like just an epiphany, like, wait a second, this isn't what I was told this was going to be. This isn't the way that it was kind of what I was expecting.
I would say that it was closer to having an epiphany. In 2012, I began having conversations on Twitter with radical feminists. And I was trying to find like a middle ground between what was emerging as the transgender orthodoxy or ideology and the skeptical position on gender identity that the radical feminists had. Just like what you're trying to do with your podcast, which is bridge different points of view, I was trying to put myself into a role where I was also trying to bridge different points of view.
Was that welcome?
Surprisingly, no.
Interesting. Yeah.
As you may find out,
Yeah.
it's a very human thing. No matter whether you're trans or whether you have a favorite football team or whether you're religious, people want to have their tribes, and when you try to disrupt that, sometimes you generate blowback.
So that's what I think makes this interview so important. I think that for someone who is very much on the outside of the trans community, and I don't know what the percentages are of like Americans who are trans. I know that in our last podcast, the number 27% was thrown out of the Williams Institute, which is a think tank at UCLA. I think that's a bit high. I don't know what percentage is trans, but it's fairly small. So there's a lot of people who are probably listening to this who don't know anyone who's trans. So what is the orthodoxy kind of like mindset, and then where do you differ from that?
The core of the orthodoxy is the assertion that if you relate to a sex that is not your birth sex, that simply making a declaration that you are that sex is enough to make that a reality. So more specifically, if I'm a male and I say I'm a female, I relate to females more because maybe I like wearing a cute dress or wearing earrings or makeup because I like those gendered things. That makes me female. Literally female. Or vice versa, if I'm a girl, but I like to play with Tonka trucks or climb trees, and I feel like I'm more, I relate to boys better. Therefore, if I say I'm a boy, that literally makes me a boy. That is the core of the orthodoxy.
Regardless of what your genitalia is.
Regardless
it's like
of,
an assault.
right, exactly.
And you reject this idea?
That's an interesting way of asking it.
Yeah.
If you have any sort of process where you make decisions on evaluating evidence or data, there is absolutely no evidence or data that would lead you to conclude that merely identifying as a sex will literally make you become that sex.
Yeah, this gets so tricky because, there's stuff, I think, there's things about our world, whatever this is, there are things that are quantifiable and then there are things that aren't. So how do you measure love or something like that? So you can quantify, and it's kind of under like the postmodernism idea of, maybe there is no objective morality or, things like along this line, because there are things that you just can't measure, you don't know. So if you feel something, then that is real. I wonder how much of the, kind of mainstream trans idea that you're talking about, this orthodoxy, is rooted in that postmodernism, idea of there is no objective truth, or there is no, if I feel something, then that is true.
It's deeply rooted in that postmodern ideology. And if you look at the sources or the scholarship that defends gender ideology, it points back to all of that group of postmodern thinking.
Mm-hmm. So are you like a pariah now of like the trans community, or have you found that you're not the only one? This is just like every other group, there are people who think one way, people who think the other, and there is like maybe this mainstream group who gets a lot more maybe media attention or something like that. But to say that all trans people think this way would be obviously false. So do you feel alone in the pushback on some of these ideas?
I'm definitely in the minority, especially online, but there are a lot of thoughtful people who are trans or detransitioned or merely gender nonconforming or gay, lesbian, some straight people who are forming communities to just discuss these ideas, to try to get at the underlying principles or causes, and to discuss some of the effects that policies based on these ideas have on society.
Yeah.
So there are some of us, unfortunately, by publicly identifying yourself as somebody who has these heterodox views. Heterodox, I mean ideas that are opposed to the mainstream views. Mm-hmm. You risk making yourself a target for abuse. So it feels silly to say this perhaps, but it requires a little bit of courage, in fact.
No, I don't think that's silly. Yeah.
Publicly question. But there, as more and more people do it, it helps embolden other people to ask questions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's silly, because just if you are trans, you're already, maybe not you, Corinna, I don't know, but you're already, at risk of certain things, whether it's, people on the street who are bigoted and stuff like that. So to be kind of on, someone who people could look at and say, like, bad things to, for whatever reason, and then already, instead of going to like the safe place of like, let me just toe the line with what everyone else in my little group, that these bigoted people just look at us all the same. Now I'm gonna, maybe disagree with them, and then they're gonna say something bad about me too. It's like a double whammy of people who could be turning against you, saying bad things about you, maybe perhaps saying to you, like, you're not helping the cause, you're not helping people, you're, like self-hating. I don't know what kind of stuff you get. What kind of pushback have you gotten from people in the trans community because of these views?
I've angered people with my views, I suppose. Mm-hmm. I am accused of being self-hating, as you say, but I want to address that.
Please.
There was a pretty prolonged period of my life where I was really trying to make myself, in fact, female in society, trying to reject the fact that I was trans, or bury it or swallow it. And by doing that, by denying something that is such a core aspect of who I am, I was making myself miserable. So when I hear the word self-hating, what I see in the people who are saying it, if I look at the other things that they write, they talk about how much they hate other people. They talk about how frustrated or stressed they are. Some people claim that the experience of being trans, openly trans, has given them PTSD. But all the whole time they're making claims that they are, in fact, members of the opposite sex. And I see echoes of my own past in those people. And I don't like to use the word self-hating, or I don't really want to accuse anybody of being self-hating. But if you are suffering from depression or anxiety because other people can see that you are trans, that means that there's something inside of you that's causing that pain. And if you want to not feel that pain, you can't fix it by making other people think differently about you. You have to learn how to think differently about yourself.
Yeah. So do you think that this is linked to, the depression, the suicide rate is something that I think is maybe the most startling and upsetting part of this, because as a school teacher, I've had trans students. I know the data on, suicide attempts, depression in the trans community. And it's really, it's sad. It's unfortunate. That for me would be like, that's the one of the biggest things we need to attack, because that's not okay. It's not okay for this many people of this group to go down that very dark road. Do you see a connection?
Well, Will, why is the suicide rate high?
I don't know.
Or I should say the attempted suicide rate.
Yeah, I don't know. And I've looked into it, and it doesn't seem to even, well, what I've heard is that it's high because it's unacceptable, and society, puts you down over and over again. It's the social construct argument. But then even after you transition, it doesn't look like the data changes a whole lot.
That's correct. If you look at other groups that have faced depression, even in our own culture, I think probably you may see an elevated suicide rate as well, but it's not comparable.
Mm.
And if you look at the suicide rates prior to transition and after transition, I think actually the science is out on that, because different studies show different results. But some of them have shown that the attempted suicide rate is still high after transition. I believe, but do not have any evidence for or to give you, I believe that whatever makes us trans, whatever makes us have questions or doubt about our gender identity, also is related to other mental health conditions, maybe anxiety disorders. And there's comorbidity with other mental health problems that relates to that risk of attempt of a suicide.
Well, I think that's a good perspective, because, we don't know, and people who claim that they know exactly why, I think that's often, that's the beauty of science is, you can always get more data and adjust and kind of add something to it, take something away, blah, 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 blah. And so I think that perspective is something that we need to look at as a society, because the vast, vast, vast majority of Americans, and I do believe this, don't want the trans community to have this suicide rate, this depression rate. I talk to a lot of people, and I'm surprised at how many people, even like MAGA red hat wearing people, are just like, I don't care what you do, whatever. Just don't, they'll say stuff like, don't put in my face or whatever like that. But I'm surprised at how many people are not just outwardly bigoted, saying like horrible things about whether it's like LGBT community or racial groups or anything like that. I've actually been pleasantly surprised, because I don't think that's the narrative that you get as much in high school education. I don't think it's the narrative that you get a lot in the news and things like that.
Well, it's not interesting to say that people that have different points of view can get along together. There's nothing to sell there.
Oh, that is interesting to me, though. Like, I don't know. I just think that's what's so cool and it's so upsetting. Like, the division that I'm seeing. I mean, it's why I started this podcast, Corinna. It's like the division I'm seeing. I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. And people are closed off and people are scared. But people are scared on all sides.
Yeah.
I mean, people are scared in the trans community, the LGBT community. People are scared in the white community. Like, they're all, like, whatever it is, everyone's scared. You know what? Sorry.
How do we get people to evaluate what they're scared of and try to measure what the risk is?
You have to be, look, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. That's why I'm doing this podcast. I think that you have to be exposed to different ideas, and you have to do it in as kind and respectful a way as possible. I think that it's what I'm trying to model with this. It's what I've tried to model with in my classroom. There's a reason why the most, extreme leftist students and the most extreme right students enjoy my class, enjoy these conversations, because I try to always be respectful, be kind, look people in the eyes, like actually hear them, actually be curious. And I try and model that, but I can only do that for my little world. I don't know.
Well, if there's one piece of advice that I would give your
Please.
Students and basically everybody, but you should question everything. You might think it through and still come to the same conclusion that you started with, but so many of the things that you believe or so many of the values that you have are built on a lot of assumptions. And it is always helpful to try to understand those assumptions and to question whether the assumptions are valid.
Yeah, it's so scary, I think, for people who, are you familiar with Jordan Peterson?
Yes.
Okay. I heard him one time say on a podcast, like the idea that if you have built your life on lies, essentially, then that's like dead wood, and your built house is built on dead wood. It's like rotting and it's very fragile. And what you need to do is like kind of burn that away, but then your house can collapse. And I think that if you have built your life, and a lot of people do this on false ideologies or just uh, ideas that are very weak, and then you start questioning that, because I agree with you. That is so nice to hear, like on this podcast. Like, yes, let's question everything, absolutely. But there are people who subscribe to an ideology that is very weak, and if their core of who they are is that, and that goes away, then who am I? Who am I? If what I believe at the core is now wrong, then who am I? And that's a terrifying concept when you're in this world where who knows what any of this is. If what you kind of hang your hat on is false, then it's just down is up, all kinds of stuff, giant ants with top hats, like the whole thing just becomes crazy. I think that's just a scary idea to a lot of people.
Well, maybe one of the skills that we need to learn in order to become complete or whole beings is how to handle keeping your identity intact when one of those underlying assumptions has failed or fallen apart.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't even know if we covered, like, how do you identify?
How do I identify?
Gender-wise.
I don't really identify gender-wise. I can tell you that my history is I was born male, and I've had treatments to feminize my body, so I am a transsexual.
Transsexual is what you like, your preferred. So when it comes to pronouns,
I'm glad you asked.
Yeah.
I tell people that they should use whichever pronoun they feel comfortable using for me, because I do not want to dictate to them what their thoughts need to be of me. Everybody ought to be able to use their own judgment. And if you feel comfortable saying she or her to me while we're having a conversation, or if you feel more comfortable referring to me as he or him, I don't want to be offended myself. I don't want the way that you refer to me to cause a collapse of my own identity. But I also don't want to dictate to you what your thinking ought to be.
That's very interesting. Like that you don't let, if someone would say something to you that you don't, I guess what's interesting to me is that you don't think of, your gender pronoun as like a fundamental core of who you are. My name's William. What's interesting is when I was growing up, everyone called me Bill. So all my friends called me Bill and stuff like that. And I came out to Los Angeles, and when I was like dating, girls wanted to call me Will rather than Bill. Bill reminded them of a weird uncle or something like that. So I started going by Will, it was better for me to get dates, which is the truth. And then people started calling me Will. And when I met my wife, she called me Will, and all my friends were like, what are you talking about? That's not your name, and blah, 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 like all my friends from high school. And I was like, I don't care what my name is. They still call me Bill. It's fine. People call me Will. It's fine. I have family members who call me Willis. I don't care. I'm me. Whatever my name is, it's me. And that's very interesting, because I have a friend who, his name is Walton. And if someone says Walter, he's like, no, it's Walton. He's like, all you have in this world is your name. And I was like, wow, I don't think like that at all. I don't have I think of myself in my mind as like, I am Will or Bill or William. I don't. So it seems like, maybe different, but also kind of similar.
I wonder if you need external validation in order to feel like a whole person, then someone else's use of your preferred pronoun might be very important to you, because if they use a different pronoun, maybe you feel extremely invalidated. I think it's important for people to be able to find sources of validation within themselves so that they don't have to rely so much on others to validate them.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great advice, especially for young people. I mean, how did you, why do you think you got to this mindset as a human being? Like, why do you think that you are pushing back on this? Why do you think that you view things the way that you do when it comes to being trans? I'm assuming, maybe I'm wrong, that you're like this with a lot of things in your life. That, you know, gender is just one of the many.
I suppose I've had a practice in my life of questioning things. I don't know that this is actually the case, but do you remember the poet Shel Silverstein?
I do, yeah.
Where the Sidewalk Ends. And
The Giving Tree.
The Giving Tree.
Yeah.
Shel Silverstein was really subversive. If you read his poems, they're mocking, they're joking, they undermine authority, and like there's this very strong subtext of the world isn't everything that you might assume that it is. And I think between Shel Silverstein and some other thinking like that I was exposed to as a child, I probably got a lot of that attitude of ask questions.
Yeah.
But that said, it took me quite a while as an adult to finally start asking questions about my own assumptions about my gender identity.
Yeah, I think I want to promote whatever is going to get individuals to feel good about themselves, but even bigger than that is like to feel like they can go out and live the life that they want to live and contribute to society in a positive way and not in a negative way. And I just think that it's good to have these different paths that you can go down. But, you know, I still have some questions about just your take on things when it comes to, you know, transgenderism and things like that. And I think that we've kind of already established that what you say is not going to be, you know, what everyone is going to believe. But I do think that you have a valid take on this stuff. Like something that comes up that people have asked me when they knew I was doing podcasts on this issue was, you know, the idea of sports. So there are, you know, records being broken by trans athletes and stuff like that. Or, you know, I'm a fan of martial arts, and there was a trans fighter who didn't even have to reveal that she was transitioned when she was like 20. She lived like 27 years as a male, transitioned, and then like within a few years was fighting in a MMA fight and like hurt some people. And you know, where do we go with this? Like, because it's one thing to swing a tennis racket, it's another thing to punch someone in the face. Like, are we going to just allow sports to be what you identify as? Should we do XX and XY chromosome leagues? Like, what is your take on this? I'm guessing what it might be, but like, what do you think?
I'm not an expert on this, so I just want to preface that.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that we consider the principle of fairness in competitive sports. What we are observing based on like trans weightlifters, trans handball players, trans cyclists, trans tennis players, right, is that by having the experience of maturing into adulthood as a male and then identifying as female and competing in women's sports, it appears that there is a unfair advantage gained by having that background. I believe, but do not have the data for, as more trans athletes become involved in sport, that we will be able to use statistical modeling to show that somebody who has had maturity as a male is going to be more likely to place higher in competitive athletic competitions. We're kind of at a point where we can form this hypothesis, but we don't have the data yet. The case that I would point to as being able to best justify forming this hypothesis is the high school track and field example in Connecticut, where in various running events, in the women's category, the top 2 athletes are male. So there's an underlying question of fairness.
Where I'm going with this is I think that there's going to be a pushback. And I think by like mainstream society is going to eventually push back. And they're going to look at the records and they see all the records are held by trans individuals. They're going to look at people getting injured. They're going to look at this stuff. And people are going to start to get angry. And they're going to like, it's a weird thing because where it's at now is like, I don't want to tell this person that they can't compete, or I don't want to tell this person that they're not, the gender that they say they are. And it's trying to be like kind. It's trying to be generous. And then eventually they're going to start to be like, well, wait a second. Okay, now stop. I think it's going to get to a point that's like the mainstream, whatever population is just going to go, no. This is gotten somewhere bad. So I'm worried that in being like kind or generous or, not wanting to hurt people's feelings or not wanting to upset people, is it's going to get to a point then where it becomes a bigger rejection. And then the bigger rejection is going to be coupled with a rejection of human beings. And it's going to turn into a lot of the bigoted things that I think we're trying to avoid. I don't know, but that's what I fear will happen with this kind of stuff.
A lot of people, trans or not trans, or just it's human to have that emotional reaction and to try to reason out why you have that emotional reaction to things instead of trying to understand the principles. So I believe that you're right. I believe that there will be a backlash. But that's partly why I answered the question in terms of fairness, because you can actually try to reason whether somebody should be allowed to compete or not on the basis of fairness. I don't want to open the subject too wide at this point, but there's a process right now of where some children are being taken through the process of transition. They're put on puberty blockers. They are stopped from having a normal puberty. And it's possible that if some of those individuals were competing in sport, that because they did not go through normal puberty, that they might not have an unfair advantage. And that means that we may have a more nuanced policy about whether trans individuals can compete in women's sports. And it might be, if you did not go through male puberty, then maybe on the basis of what's fair or not, maybe that's the qualifier of whether you're allowed to compete or not.
Yeah, and then that opens up a whole different issue, I mean, yes. And I have a good close friend who's a gay man. And when he was about 7 years old, he told us a story. And he said when he was about 7 years old, he tried on one of his sister's dresses. And he put on the dress and went out to his room or to his family. And his parents were like, no, let's say his name is Tony. No, Tony, girls wear dresses. Boys wear pants. You should go change that. And he can only speak for himself, but he's like, thank God they did that. He's like, because I was a kid, when you're 7 years old, you're just figuring out what the world is. You see the ocean, you're like, that is terrifying. You don't know. And then on top of that, you're gay. So there's another level of confusion is when we talk about like the frame of the house, like his frame, he didn't have anything to root it in. And he's like, I'm not trans. He's like, I'm just gay. And if I would have been told like, oh, wonderful, you want to wear that dress, go wear it, then he would have gone down a road that wasn't meant for him. And he said like, it gave me some structure and I needed structure. Everyone needs structure. And
okay.
yeah.
Well, I could imagine a similar household where parents would say, the clothes that you wear don't determine the sex that you are, and provide structure that way without telling a child, hey, dressing up in these clothes is wrong. I think it's a little bit sexist to say girls wear dresses and boys wear pants.
Yeah.
But to tell a child the things that you put on your body or the interests that you have as an individual don't fundamentally change the nature of who you are. That's what I would like to see parents saying. I don't have kids, so I guess it's not fair for me to say. But I also don't have kids because I'm trans. So there you go.
I think that's a very valid thing for you to say. I mean, I think that, I guess that's what I'm trying to get to is try to figure out what is the best way. I have two little kids. I'm a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And I don't know. I don't know how their brains are going to develop. I don't know how they're going to think. And, I think a lot of parents are just trying to do the best they can, and they love their kids. And so if their kid says that they want to wear a certain thing, like maybe that is the best way. I think you got to just think about this. And I think that this is an important conversation. I think your opinion is very valid. Is that would you be okay with like talking a little bit about like when you were growing up, like how was that handled?
Sure. What would you like to start out?
Just in general, when you first expressed interest in maybe wearing like women's clothes, like how was that handled by maybe your family or community, whatever it was?
Well, I grew up in Nevada. And at that, I guess it doesn't really matter, but Nevada, when I was growing up, was still kind of had maybe some of those traces of that Wild West culture to it still.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not that very many people are dressing up in like cowboy boots or hats or anything, but there's still that. Let's say it wasn't New York City, right?
Okay.
The women in my life all wore pants or flannel shirts, were hard workers, had sun-beaten skin. There wasn't a lot of modeling of femininity around me at all.
Interesting. Yeah.
So for me, it wasn't telling my family that I wanted to wear girls' clothes. It was that the social groups and activities that we're doing were things that I wanted to do. I wanted to be in the jazzercise class. I wanted to play on the monkey bars. And for some reason, I don't know why, but in that time and place, the monkey bars were that was the girls' zone.
Interesting. Okay.
So, I got pressure to, go hang out with boys instead of hanging out with girls. And at some point, I learned that of the existence of trans people. And when I learned about them, I thought, that sounds like who I am.
How old were you, like roughly, when you first like thought like, oh, you heard of it, and then you're like, maybe that's what I am?
Maybe 12 or 13.
Okay.
Somewhere around there.
Okay.
But I'd been pretty different from the boys in my school up to that point. But because I felt ostracized from boys in my school, and I didn't have a lot of good role models of men who were, not masculine, the Western men, it was very easy for me to identify more with women and girls than it was with boys. So I think all of that contributed to my having a gender identity disorder, or gender dysphoria as we call it now.
So can I go down that road a little bit? Like, do you see it as a disorder? Do you see it as like a mental illness? I don't know how do you see what transgenderism is?
It's really hard to say that it's a disorder or a mental disease without it sounding very negative, right?
Yeah, that does sound. It sounds like something that needs to get cured.
It does. But let's say that I was. I have this social disorder or anxiety right now, however you call it. I don't like large crowds. Mm-hmm. They freak me out. I hate being around. My nightmare scenario is the day after Thanksgiving rush sale, right? Everybody's trying to get the deals. I would never be able to handle that.
Right. Yeah, but I can relate.
To say, yeah, that's a variety of social anxiety disorder. It's not such a big deal.
Right. It doesn't need to get cured. It's just like, right. You just have to kind of, okay, that's interesting.
Well, it depends on how much it disrupts your life, right?
Right.
If you can't leave your house, then you need treatment. Mm-hmm. If it's really easy for you to order your life so that you aren't feeling bad frequently, then it's just something that you can manage. Clearly, if you feel like you need to take hormones or have surgery in order to feel whole in your body, that is some sort of disorder. Like we are not naturally oriented towards needing these external treatments in order to feel complete. And if we feel like we have to have those things in order to be at peace, like what is that? That's some sort of disorder.
Yeah, like,
and I don't see why it should be stigmatized any more than other types of social anxiety disorder.
That's it. Either do I. Like, it's interesting because I hear the pushback a lot from people in the LGBT community saying it's not a disorder, and then I think even now, for whatever reasons, I think even on the university level, psychology data is now supporting the idea that it's not a disorder and things like that. I don't know. I guess because if you think of it that way as a disorder, then it seems like you would have maybe more kindness towards someone. Like if someone has something, if they're suffering from anxiety disorder, then you might be like, oh, well, let's stay away from crowds because I don't want you to feel uncomfortable. Like, I think that you might be a little less harsh or cruel to someone who, if you think of them in that way. Do you need to go, or do we have 5 minutes? You need to go?
Yep, we need to start wrapping up.
Okay, no problem. Well, this was great, Corinna. Really, thank you so much. I think that, this as an educational podcast, I think that the more we can shed light on the different perspectives is great. Is there anything that you wanna like talk about or plug or say, when closing?
No, I just want to remind your students and your audience, you got to keep an open mind. Try to put yourself in somebody else's perspective. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with them or that you have to validate everything that they're saying, but the only way that you can really learn and grow and improve your own thinking is to be able to listen.
I love that. Corinna, thank you. Thank you sincerely. Thank you very much for doing this. All right. Take care.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.